realize the significance, especially since it is a day named after your church. This is Christ the King Sunday. And Christ the King Sunday is not just cool because this church is named after it. Christ the King Sunday is the culmination of the church year. It's the end of year C, we would call it in our lectionary. We'll move back to year A. But then it's kind of weird because in the secular world, we have New Year's Day the January 1st. But here, the church year begins anew with Advent. And the reason being is that the church year mirrors the life of Jesus Christ. And so Advent is the season in which we prepare for the birth of the King. And so we start the church year then with preparing for the birth, with getting ready for Christmas. And so that's why the church year starts there. And it moves and progresses all the way through the life of Jesus Christ and the calling of the disciples and the growth of the church and all these things, and then culminates on this day, which is Christ the King Sunday. And that's when, if you would, we finally recognize who this baby born in a stable was, that now we're dealing with a king. Not just any king, but the King of Kings. And so the whole thing moves toward, hopefully, us getting to the end of the church year where we can celebrate the kingship of Jesus Christ. And so the lessons today are focused on kingship, even though it's a little bit hard to pull that out and to kind of see the kingship that's involved there. And so I want to unpack that a little bit and maybe help us to appreciate what's going on. Of course, you have this his enthronement. The reason why it's hard for us to see Christ as the king is when he sits at the right hand of God upon his throne in heaven, that's in heaven. So we don't get to see that part. What we got to see was Jesus Christ crucified. And what you need to realize, he was wearing a crown, albeit it wasn't gold, it was a crown of thorns. And in other words, his throne really on earth, in the Gospels, is the cross. And so it's really hard. Everybody who sees him crucified, the Romans specifically crucified you to humiliate you. A king sitting on a throne is to lift him up so that we can see his glory. And yet, Christ was lifted up on this cross, and yet somehow that reveals the glory of this king. Obviously, we're dealing with a different king than the kind that the world would appreciate. It's a king who shows his love for humanity, in that no greater love hath a man than that he lay down his life for his friends. And Christ there upon the cross is saying, I, even though I am God, even though I am the King of Kings, love you. That's what he's shouting from the cross. I will give up everything for you because I have come with a mission. And this is the mission that I want you to understand, and it's a little bit hard to miss because the benefit of being the guy who's preaching is that I get these lessons and I look at them for a long time. And so I can digest them. I can read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them. Whereas you kind of hear them on Sunday morning and it's like, it's hard to follow what's going on. So why do we start out with this lesson from Jeremiah talking about shepherds when this is Christ the King Sunday? Well, once again, you go back to this Jesus guy, the King of Kings, and in John 10 he declares, I am the good shepherd. And what you need to understand is in the culture that was a culture devoted to a lot of, to this day, you go over to the Middle East and you see shepherds running around all over the place with their sheep. And so a shepherd became the image then of what it is to be a good king. A good shepherd is a good king. And this lesson from Jeremiah then is unpacking what it is to be a good shepherd and what it is to be a bad shepherd. I'm going to cut right to the chase because I think it's fairly significant. The lessons today talk about gathering. There's the word. And if you go back through these things, you'll see forms of gathering. Even in the collect, it says, mercifully grant that the peoples of the earth, read the sheep of God's flock, mercifully grant that those people divided and enslaved by sin, scattered, may be freed and brought together, gathered under his most gracious rule. That collect is designed to help us understand exactly what's going on in all the lessons. And the main point of the lessons is that God is doing this incredible act by sending his son, the Good Shepherd, to be a good shepherd and to succeed where the shepherds of the earth have failed. Well, who would be the shepherds of the earth? And they would be leaders once again, not necessarily just kings, but leaders. And so unpack what it means to be a leader then. Somebody who has some bit of authority over other people. And who might that be? Well, certainly the kings in Israel. And all you got to do is read 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and you see that the kings were basket cases. They were a total disaster. All they cared about really was amassing wealth or amassing power, amassing wives, Solomon, concubines. And I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot up here to realize that somebody whose hobby is just amassing concubines, they're missing the boat a little bit. And so that's the way it was with the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. They blew it. Yet there was one, and even he blew it with Bathsheba. There was this David guy, and God really appreciated him because David, at least when he messed up, fell on his knees and said, "Forgive me," and repented and sought to amend his life. And so God was so used to the kings being a mess that when he saw David do this, he says, okay, this guy's good, I can use this guy. And he promises David and establishes a covenant with him that a descendant of yours will sit upon the throne forever. Well, the kings got worse and worse and worse and worse after David. And it looked like then when the Babylonian exile comes and Jerusalem is destroyed, Judah's gone, Israel's gone, everybody's in exile. It looked like the whole plan of God and the promise to David was gone. But there was this descendant who was a carpenter. That's how far removed we are from the kings of Israel. This descendant, his name was Joseph. And it just so happened that his wife, too, Mary, had a descent that could be traced back to that David guy way back in the background. And Jesus was born. And he was a good shepherd. And his mission was this: to gather the sheep that have been scattered, to seek out those that are lame and to heal them and carry them home, to find those that are hungry and to feed them, but to regather God's people, all of God's people, and bring them back under, I love the phrase, under his most gracious rule. And that's what he's about. Now, there's a story that we have that we appreciate a little bit as Anglicans because it's kind of built into our liturgy. When we're doing the Eucharistic prayer, we've got this story. We have this phrase, we are not worthy so much as to, but thou art the same Lord. Interesting, you're using the old prayer book phrase property. The new prayer book, I think, changes it to character. I kind of like property myself because I'm used to it, but whose property is always to have mercy. Isn't it amazing how our liturgy just, it's right there. You've got it. But the crumbs under your table, where's that come from?
Gathers wants her daughter to be healed.
There you go, the Syrophoenician woman. So you've got a Syrophoenician. Notice Syrophoenician, it doesn't really matter what she is, but she's a foreigner. She's a Gentile, okay? Syria or Phoenicia in the region of Tyre and Sidon, notorious for sexual immorality and for wicked, bad, nasty. So these aren't just the area of the Gentiles. These are really bad Gentiles in that area where this woman is. So this woman is there, and her daughter has a problem. Her daughter is possessed by a demon. So you've got, let's set up the scene here. You've got a woman who's a woman, first of all, okay? And good Jewish men don't talk to women. So there's this woman, and she is a pagan, if you would. Not only that, but she lives in the land of really bad pagans, and she's got a daughter possessed by a demon. What does she have going for her? Coming to the holy man. She doesn't have a whole lot other than, and this is fascinating, she normally, this pagan woman, would go to the pagan temple with a daughter possessed by a demon and ask the pagan gods to heal her daughter. No doubt she's probably done that, but word has come to her that this Jewish, read in, enemy of me and my people, this Jewish guy, he's got something. He's got power. He can heal. What's more is I heard he cares about the lost sheep, the broken ones, the lame. I hear this guy is compassionate. And I'm going to seek him out. And she comes and she even proclaims, Lord, title of honor. How many of the Jews call Jesus Lord? Not a whole lot. Lord, I want you. I have a need. Lord, heal my daughter. Comes to Jesus. And Jesus, basically at first, he sees this foreign woman and he's going to test her. Now, this is a hard lesson, and I think we misinterpret it, and I hope I unpack it for you in such a way that maybe you understand it today. I think I finally, in studying, have got a handle on it. Because Jesus sees this woman, and she has this huge need, and she comes to him in faith, if you would, and humbly says, Lord, heal my daughter. She's possessed by a demon. And of course, the part of the story that we'll remember then is Jesus does what? Calls her a dog. Now, some of us who love dogs might think that's fun. But in that culture, dogs are scavengers, garbage collectors. They don't live in your house and sleep on your bed like they do here in America. They're not part of the family like they are here in America. As a matter of fact, when I was in Oman in the Peace Corps, every now and then the men would go out on pickup trucks. You're going to hate to hear this. But there'd be packs of wild dogs, and the men would go out and they'd shoot them. Because the dogs were seen as, they're one step removed from a pig. And pigs are seen as totally unclean, horrible animals. And so dogs are just ones. And he just says, you know, we can't take the children's food and give it to the dogs. Ouch. Now I want you to understand you've got several things going on. We only look at Jesus here and we think, that is so out of his character. Why would he say that to this woman whose heart is breaking for her daughter possessed by a demon? It just doesn't seem to fit. And it doesn't fit because in another time you have the same scene, Jesus with the woman at the well. And he doesn't end up calling her dog, even though she's a Samaritan. They would be considered an enemy of God's people too. So it seems out of character and totally not Jesus to be calling this woman a dog. And it is. What's he doing? He's there with somebody else. He, the woman, and the disciples. And the disciples are here, and you need to realize they're here in Tyre and Sidon because they've left Israel, they've left Judah, they're kind of on vacation a little bit. And when this woman comes up and says, and she's this pagan, horrible woman, she comes up, the first thing the disciples say is, get her out of here. Send her away, just like they do with the little kids. Get them out of here, send them away. And he says no. He begins to engage her and talk to her, but he does end up calling her. And then some commentators say, well, it wasn't too bad. He uses the diminutive form of dog, meaning it was a little dog. I don't think she cared whether she was, and then they really stretch and say, it was a cute puppy. He was calling her a cute puppy. No. Still doesn't, he's still calling her a dog. But she, in her faith, and this is what she does have. She's got nothing going for her, but she has this faith in this Jewish guy, this Jewish rabbi, this healer, this shepherd. She has enough faith in him, she engages him back, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And it's fascinating there, you called me a little dog, and all I say is, but even the little dogs get to eat the little food, the little pieces of bread, the crumbs. In other words, she comes back at him in faith. She's not going to allow his test to push her away. But what's the test? The real test was going on with the disciples. Because you see, what do the disciples think of this woman? She's a dog. Jesus doesn't think that even though he says that, but what he's doing is saying what they're thinking. And sees the faith of this woman, and I think Jesus looks into her heart and knows, I'm dealing with a winner here. He doesn't see her as a woman. He doesn't see her as a Gentile. He doesn't even see her as the mom of a demon-possessed girl. He sees her as a human being that he loves, as a sheep of the fold that he came to gather. And you're saying, that's a stretch, because he even says in this passage, but I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which was another test, by the way. It's another test because that's the way that the disciples are thinking. But take lost sheep of the house of Israel. He was sent to the lost sheep. I believe that fully with my whole heart. House of Israel, what does he say about that? To the Jews who come to him and says, we're children of Abraham. We are members of the house of Israel. And Jesus says, I can raise up children of Israel, children of Abraham, from the rocks. In other words, I believe that Jesus sees everybody as his flock. And he is coming to gather everybody, but the mindset of the disciples is, it's only the Jews, it's only the good people that he's going to gather. And Jesus says, I've come to gather the broken. I've come to gather the hurt and buckaroos. I've come to gather women who are powerless. I've come to gather little girls that are demon-possessed. And you say, it's a stretch, Zimmerman. Yeah, but take Matthew. This is Matthew chapter 15. Go back earlier when he's gathering the disciples. He gets Matthew. And we say, oh, Matthew. St. Matthew, there was a holy man. He was a tax collector. James and John, the sons of thunder. Good name for a biker club. These weren't nice, kind, gentle people with halos like we see in the stained glass windows. These were hardcore, broken, hurting individuals. Take Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament. His hobby was killing Christians. That was his hobby. That's what gave him joy, watching Stephen get stoned to death. And yet he becomes the author of most of the New Testament. I want you to understand the role of Jesus as the one, the shepherd, who comes to look for the one that is the basket case that wanders off while the 99 are still there. To look for the Canaanite women, to look for the ones that have demon-possessed daughters. And when he sees the faith of this woman, your request is granted. Your daughter is made well. I have yet to see such faith even in Israel. What did that do to the disciples? blows their world. Because I think the Good Shepherd is saying to his mini shepherds, the shepherds in training, don't just look for the fat sheep. Don't just look for the ones that you like. Look for the broken ones, the hurting ones. And your job is my job. And it's to gather, to bring them together, ultimately, under his most gracious rule. And that's what we're celebrating here today. The gracious rule of the Good Shepherd. And that's good news for you. It's good news for me. There's no sheep that is too broken that the Good Shepherd is not longing to go out and find them and bring them back into his fold. You're not too young, you're not too old, you're not too white, you're not too black. Jesus loves all the sheep. You're not too female, you're not too male. He died and loves all of them. They are precious. There's one more part of it, and that is, there's a bit of Jeremiah that's really hard to hear, but also Ezekiel chapter 34 talks about the shepherds again, and it starts out with, woe unto you wicked shepherds. And the great condemnation of the wicked shepherds is this: you have scattered my flock. Once again, instead of gathering, you've driven them away. So the message for me is, if we would be shepherds in training like the disciples, if we would call ourselves disciples of Jesus Christ, that's our job, is to be gatherers. And to gather, sometimes you got to realize it's the stupid sheep who doesn't have enough sense to come in, who's out there, and what do we need to do? Go out and find them. Now you say, well, duh, but I want you to hear that, because the model of so many of our churches is that we come together rather than going out and finding the hurting buckaroos. And think of what Jesus' ministry was about. He really, he went to the synagogue occasionally. Whenever he went there, it usually was a bad experience. But he'd go to the synagogue, but his whole ministry for 3 years with the disciples following him, which in and of itself is an act of gathering. Follow me, come to me, gather everybody. But his whole ministry was going out into the Judean countryside, going to Tyre and Sidon, going to places where there were prostitutes and horrible people, going through the land of Samaria, even though most Jews very often would take the long way around Samaria so they didn't have to get that dirty, horrible Samaritan dirt on their shoes. Jesus would go right through because he was gathering. I love Young Life because I think in many ways Young Life gets it. And the message of Young Life says, if you're going to evangelize a kid, if you're going to gather them and bring them in, the first step is go out and find out where the kids are. Go out. Find out where the kids are, and then hang out where the kids are. And then earn the kids' trust through time. And then share the gospel with them, the gospel of a good shepherd who loves them. But the key there is going out. It's called evangelism. But the church has kind of dropped the ball on it. We've forgotten the importance of going out. And I think in many ways, we've forgotten the importance of gathering. And God forbid that we would be like the Corinthian church or the Jews back in Jesus' day, or God forbid that we would say, I only want sheep that look like me. Think about ways we can find the lost sheep, the lame sheep, the underfed sheep, the broken sheep. Those are the ones Jesus went after. And those are the ones we should go after too. Happy Christ the King Sunday. Christ the King, the Good Shepherd.